Let's get something clear right away. Medieval life was not a fairy tale. It wasn't knights in shining armor rescuing damsels. It wasn't grand banquets, soaring cathedrals, or courtly dances under moonlight. Not for most people. For the average soul, the peasant in the field, the wife hunched over a smoky fire, the barefoot child chasing a chicken through a puddle, life was hard. Hard, damp, itchy, smelly, and often short. Welcome to the mud. That's where we'll begin. Not metaphorical mud, real mud. Thick, squelching, relentless mud. Coating your boots, clinging to your skirt hem, splashing up your calves when a passing ox cart hits a rut. In many medieval villages, the streets were little more than dirt paths carved between thatch roof cottages. And when it rained, which was often, those paths became trenches of filth. Imagine walking through it. There's no pavement, no drainage. You step outside and immediately sink into a cold, wet soup of soil, animal dung, old straw, kitchen slop, and possibly something worse. It doesn't wash off. It becomes part of you. You wipe your hands on your apron. Your apron is muddy too. You scratch your neck. Your fingernails are caked brown. You take a deep breath, and the air smells of smoke, manure, and the faint tang of moldy cheese. This was home. Now, imagine you're not stepping outside, but waking up inside. You're lying on a straw mattress in the corner of a dark, smoky room. It's cold. There's a draft slipping under the wooden door. Your blanket is scratchy wool, patched in 5 places. Your pillow is a sack of reeds. You shift slightly, and something bites your ankle. Flea? Probably. You roll over. The mattress crunches. Straw. Bugs. Dust. Someone snoring beside you. Your brother. Your cousin. Maybe both. They smell of old onions and sheep. The floor is hard-packed earth. There's no insulation, no fireplace in your bedroom. If there's heat, it's drifting in faintly from the hearth in the center of the house, still glowing dimly from the night before. The walls are timber and wattle and daub, wooden beams packed with a paste of clay, straw, and animal dung. Sometimes, in winter, frost grows on the inside of the wall. You scrape it off with your sleeve. This is your castle. There's no glass in the window, just a wooden shutter. No bathroom down the hall, just a chamber pot under the bed. Or, if you're unlucky, a trip to the edge of the village where the communal pit waits with a swarm of flies and a faint groan of horror. Everything smells like smoke. The hearth was your central heat source, your stove, and your indoor campfire. But smoke didn't go up a chimney. There were no chimneys. It filled the house, curled into rafters, clung to your hair and your lungs. Everyone coughed. Everyone had red eyes. Some grandmothers never stopped wheezing. The smoke helped, in a way. It drove off insects and dried the thatch roof. But it also meant you lived inside a permanent fog, coughing your way through breakfast. Speaking of breakfast, you tear a chunk from yesterday's crusty bread. It's hard as a stone. You dip it in thin ale or water to soften it. It tastes faintly of mildew, maybe smoke, maybe sour milk. You chew carefully. Molars aren't what they used to be. If you're lucky, there might be a dab of cheese. Or a slice of onion. Most days, it's just bread. Again, your clothes are wool. Coarse. Itchy. You wear them day and night. No pajamas here. Your tunic smells of sweat and smoke. Underwear? Unlikely. Soap? If you're lucky. You scratch again. Fleas? Or just the wool. Outside, a rooster crows. But not poetically. It screeches like it's been stepped on. Dogs bark. A cow moos. A child yells, already chasing a goose. Your neighbor's door slams. You hear the splash of a bucket into a trough. A chicken runs by with something it shouldn't have. Welcome to the morning. And welcome to life in the mud. Because while medieval life did include kings and castles, the truth is that 90% of people lived like this. In small villages, muddy farmsteads, or cramped townhouses. They were farmers, herders, tanners, brewers, coopers, weavers, and beggars. They didn't write history books. They lived in the margins of the page. And yet they endured. With fleas and filth, with back-breaking labor and empty stomachs. They built the world beneath the stories. They raised children, baked bread, traded gossip, and prayed to saints whose names they couldn't spell. They buried their dead and carried on. So, as you listen tonight, drifting deeper into the warmth of your blankets and the hush of imagined history, forget the shiny swords and polished armor. Think instead of muddy boots, of cracked wooden bowls, of straw mattresses and smoky beams, of lives lived close to the ground and close to each other. That's where we begin. Now, breathe slowly. Let the crackle of the hearth settle around you. Let the smell of bread and wood smoke drift into your dreams. You're lying on straw, covered in a woolen blanket, sharing a room with a cow, 3 cousins, and a rat in the rafters. Sleep comes slowly here, but it does come. Let your limbs go heavy. Let your thoughts shuffle like muddy boots through a medieval village. Tomorrow, there'll be bread to bake and fields to hoe. But for now, it's just you, the mud, and the night. Sleep now. The rooster is quiet. The smoke curls gently. And the fleas, well, they'll wait. You awake not to birdsong or a gentle breeze, but to a stiff back and the stifling closeness of 5 other people and 2 goats breathing beside you. It's pitch black, the kind of dark that feels heavy and permanent, like the night itself is clinging to your skin. There's no sunrise peeking through windows, because there are no windows. Only slats in the wall that let in more wind than light. And you certainly don't have the luxury of waking naturally. Someone is already stirring beside you. A child kicks in their sleep. The cow moves softly, shifting on the dirt floor. It's time. You stretch slowly, every joint in your body protesting after a night on a straw-stuffed sack that smells vaguely of damp wool, fire smoke, and something you don't want to think too hard about. You swat at the itch crawling up your calf, probably another flea, and grope in the dark for your tunic, stiff from yesterday's sweat and soot. No one has privacy in a peasant's cottage. You dress in the same corner where your brother sleeps, your mother prays, and your father keeps the family's 3 prized hens. The floor is hard and cold, made of packed earth that turns to mud in the rainy months. Your bare feet slide into worn leather shoes, the soles flapping just a bit with each step, but they're the only pair you have. You move carefully to avoid stepping in the chicken droppings near the hearth. The air inside the cottage smells like old onions, wet wool, and the animal stink of living things pressed too close for too long. Your first chore is stirring the fire back to life. You poke through the ashes with a stick, blowing gently until a faint orange glow breathes back. A few splinters of kindling coax the flame, and soon smoke is curling up toward the thatch roof, searching in vain for a chimney that doesn't exist. The smoke will hover inside for hours, staining the low ceiling and your lungs with its pungent perfume. Your eyes water, but you're used to that. Breakfast, if it can be called that, is the same as yesterday and every other day. A crust of brown bread, rough as bark and harder than stone. You soak it briefly in a cup of water and vinegar to soften it. Sometimes there's a smear of lard or a sprinkle of salt if you're lucky. This morning, luck has passed you by. You tear at the bread slowly, chewing carefully so you don't chip a tooth. The bread was baked days ago, maybe weeks, and bits of grit from the grindstone are embedded in the crust. Your younger sister stirs beside the hearth, scratching at her scalp. Your mother is already outside tending to the latrine trench behind the cottage. There's no bathroom inside, of course. Just a communal pit out back, dug shallow and surrounded by a leaning wooden fence that offers no real privacy. You hold your breath as you pass it on your way to fetch water. The morning air is biting, and mist clings to the thatched roofs like ghostly blankets. You walk down the lane with a bucket in hand. The road is a mix of dried manure, rotting straw, and patches of frost. The communal well is already busy. A few neighbors murmur greetings while others glare, sleep still stuck in their faces. The water is bracing cold. You fill your bucket and try not to spill on the way back, the chill soaking into your fingers until they go stiff. Back home, the animals need feeding. The pigs grunt impatiently in their pen beside the house, and the chickens cluck noisily, pecking at your feet for scraps. You scatter some grain and hope the rats haven't gotten to it first. Feed is precious. The goats nudge your legs for attention, their breath warm and sharp with the smell of hay and old milk. You rub one between the horns absent-mindedly, then wipe your hands on your tunic. The children are up now, scratching and yawning, elbowing each other over the remains of the bread. Your mother wipes her hands on her apron and begins to mix flour and water for the next batch of loaves. There's no yeast, just sourdough starter passed from neighbor to neighbor, a communal science experiment that occasionally yields edible results. You step outside again. The fields call, and there's manure to spread, fences to patch, and maybe, if the weather holds, early planting to begin. Your father is already swinging a hoe at the stubborn soil, muttering curses at the rocks that refuse to move. The ground is hard and unyielding, like most things in life. Lunch will be another hunk of bread, maybe with a weak onion soup. You think about it already, not with excitement, but with a kind of patient endurance. There's no feasting here, no banquets or meat pies, just survival, day by day, bite by bite. Even your clothes sag with fatigue. Your tunic is patched in 5 places, and your belt is fraying. Your hose are mismatched, one wool, one linen, and your cloak is more whole than fabric. But you wrap it tighter as the wind picks up, carrying with it the scent of distant dung fires and damp earth. In the distance, the church bell rings. Time for prayer, time for labor, time to keep going. And so the peasants' mourning drags on, not with urgency, but with a kind of slow, muddy determination. You carry your bucket. You stoke the fire. You chew your bread. You endure. The fleas bite. The pigs grunt. The sky brightens faintly overhead. Tomorrow will look exactly the same. But for now, you have made it through the first part of the day. Sleep will come again, eventually, just as it always does. And when it does, you'll curl under your blanket of straw and scratchy wool, listening to the soft breathing of your siblings, the rustling of mice in the walls, and the far-off howl of a night wind that never quite leaves the thatch alone. You will dream of bread that doesn't crack your teeth. You will dream of warm feet. You will dream of silence. Until then, the chores await. The cows are lowing again. You step inside a medieval peasant's home, and at first, you're not sure you've entered a home at all. It's dim, not because it's evening, but because there are hardly any windows. Just a few slits cut into the wooden or wattle and daub walls, covered with stretched animal skins or thin cloth that flap limply in the breeze, doing little to block cold or let in light. There's no glass, of course, unless you're extremely wealthy, and certainly no curtains to draw. The sunlight barely filters through, and the smoky haze inside makes everything feel like twilight, even at noon. The air is heavy. It's a blend of old straw, damp earth, burnt fat, animal sweat, and something sharper, like spoiled milk and the mildew clinging to the timbers. A low ceiling beams overhead, darkened from years of soot. There's no chimney, so smoke from the hearth just pools up into the rafters, hovering there like a sluggish cloud before eventually drifting out through the same cracks it came in through, or not at all. The floor is, well, it's dirt. Not just dusty dirt, but packed, greasy, uneven earth that has absorbed years of spilled stew, animal droppings, chamber pot misses, and muddy footprints. It's sometimes strewn with rushes or straw, meant to absorb messes and cover the smell. But these aren't changed daily, or even weekly. They're trampled in, layered with herbs or dried flowers if you're lucky, and left to ferment into a crunchy, musty carpet that squishes slightly underfoot. Walls are made of wattle and daub, sticks woven together and plastered with mud, straw, and dung. Over time, cracks form. Water seeps in during rainstorms, warping the timbers and softening the daub until it flakes off in damp chunks. Insects nest inside. Spiders claim corners. If you press your hand against the wall, it's cold, slightly damp, and gives just a little under your fingers. There's furniture, technically. A low table made from roughly hewn planks. A few stools, uneven and prone to tipping. Maybe a wooden chest for all the family's belongings. Clothes, tools, dried herbs, a spoon or two. Beds are little more than wooden frames with straw mattresses, often laid directly on the floor. The straw is rarely changed, home to fleas, lice, and the occasional rat that finds its way in through a loose board or unlatched door. A central hearth flickers dimly, more smoke than flame. There's no real kitchen, just a blackened pot hanging over coals, bubbling with something vaguely edible. The smoke curls upward, staining the walls, the ceiling beams, your eyes, your throat. After a while, your nose gets used to the constant sting. Most people simply squint and carry on. There is no running water, no taps, no sinks. Water is fetched from the nearest stream or communal well and stored in heavy ceramic jugs. It's tepid, often gritty, and used sparingly, for drinking, cooking, and occasionally wiping down the children when they get too sticky with porridge or soup. Bathing rarely happens here. If it does, it's a cloth dipped in water and scrubbed over limbs near the fire. Entire families might use the same basin, the same rag. The idea of privacy doesn't exist, not in space, not in habits. Everything is shared, and everything is seen. Household tools hang from nails or are propped in corners. Scythes, sickles, wooden pitchforks, a broken pot waiting to be patched. There are baskets woven from reeds, often patched and repatched. Scraps of leather, bits of cloth, bent nails stored in boxes carved from old wood. Nothing is thrown away unless it's completely useless, and even then, someone might try to use it just one more time. Overhead, the thatched roof rustles faintly. Mice or birds are living up there. Rain seeps through in certain spots, forming slow drips that splatter onto the rushes below. If you look up, you'll see daylight peeking through uneven holes. The roof, a fragile patchwork of straw and sticks, does what it can. In winter, the cold creeps through the cracks in the walls and the spaces between floorboards. People huddle together at night, layering every spare cloth and animal pelt over themselves. In summer, heat builds inside like a kiln, trapped under the roof, baking the room until everyone is slick with sweat and soot. Flies buzz around relentlessly. They land on your food, your hands, your face. There are no screens, no fans, no sprays, just occasional flapping of cloth or a swat with a twig bundle. In the corner, someone's grandmother snores softly beneath a blanket that hasn't been washed in weeks. A toddler stares blankly at the embers, a streak of something unidentifiable smeared across their cheek. And still, life goes on. Someone is weaving baskets near the fire, their hands methodical and calloused. A pot bubbles with thin barley soup. A girl mends a tunic, her stitches uneven but steady. A boy pokes at a rat in the corner with a stick. Behind them, a chicken clucks softly in a woven pen, sharing the space like any other family member. In many homes, livestock are kept inside. Goats, pigs, sometimes even cows. They provide warmth in the winter, at the cost of noise, mess, and fleas. But warmth is precious. Children nestle against animals at night. Straw is pulled tighter. The door is barred with a wooden plank, not to keep people out, but to keep wolves and wild dogs from wandering in. Even aristocratic homes aren't free from grime. Larger, yes. Decorated with tapestries, perhaps. But the same smoke, the same drafty corners, the same problem of fleas burrowing into seams and firewood full of beetles. The difference is quantity, more space, more cloth, better rushes, not cleanliness. There are no waste bins, no disposal systems. Trash is swept into corners or tossed outside. Bones from meals, broken tools, old shoes. The yard outside is often worse than inside. Puddles of waste, clumps of dung, a growing pile of rags too worn to patch. And at night, when the fire dies down to embers, the home glows faintly, a smoky lantern in the dark village landscape. Inside, the family sleeps in a tangle of limbs and furs, children pressed against their parents, pigs grunting softly in their pens. The smell lingers. The walls hold stories. And as you lie in your own clean bed, consider this place, where warmth came with fleas, food came with soot, and the hearth never stopped smoking. Breathe in slowly. Let the scent of imagined wood smoke and ancient straw fill your mind. The hard edges of the wooden walls soften into shadow. You are safe now. No lice tonight. No dripping thatch above your head. Just stillness. And sleep. Let's talk about cleanliness, or the medieval idea of it. You wake up on a chilly morning in your peasant cottage. The fire has gone out, and the air is damp. There's a dull ache behind your eyes, a tickle in your throat. You scratch your arm absent-mindedly and catch a flea between your fingernails. You squeeze it. It pops. You sigh and flick it into the straw. You are not sick, technically. This is just normal. The concept of being clean in medieval Europe was very different from what we'd expect today. Most peasants didn't bathe often, not because they didn't want to, but because it simply wasn't practical. Water had to be fetched by hand, heated by fire, and poured into a wooden tub that leaked at the seams. If you were lucky, maybe once a week, or even once a month, you'd scrub yourself down with a wet cloth or sit in a lukewarm soup of reused bathwater shared by the entire family. Soap existed, but it was rough stuff. Made from animal fat and ash, it smelled strongly and left the skin dry and raw. If you were very poor, you didn't have any. You might try herbs like rosemary or lavender to mask your scent, if you had a patch growing near your cottage. Otherwise, you simply carried the smell of sweat, smoke, and whatever you'd been rolling around in lately. And it wasn't just peasants. Even wealthier folks, lords, ladies, clergy, might bathe only a few times per year. Their clothes were washed more frequently than their bodies. A noblewoman might change her undergarments several times a week, believing it would help absorb the dirt and smells from her skin. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the odor just lingered, politely ignored by the rest of the court. Hair washing was even more rare. Water was cold, lice were common, and many people covered their heads with hoods, caps, or veils most of the time anyway. Head lice were such a given that people carried little combs to scrape them out, their teeth clicking softly against the scalp, like fingernails on bark. Children picked nits from each other like monkeys. It was a social activity, a form of bonding, a necessary one. As for oral hygiene, well, there were no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, not even a proper understanding of cavities. Peasants might chew on sticks to scrape their teeth or rinse with wine or vinegar if they were feeling fancy. Some scrubbed with ashes or salt. Mouths often reeked of onion, rot, or whatever stew they'd last eaten. Teeth went black. They fell out. People learned to chew with their gums, adapting to the pain. A toothache could last for weeks, flaring red hot, until the tooth cracked or was yanked out with a pair of tongs. Dentists, if you could call them that, were often traveling barbers or monks. They pulled teeth on wooden stools in market squares, gripping the bad molar with a rusty iron hook while their patients screamed and thrashed. No anesthetic, just a prayer and maybe a leather strap to bite down on. If the barber was skilled, the tooth came out in one go. If not, well, you still got charged. Even more curious were medieval medical beliefs about health and cleanliness. The human body, they believed, was ruled by the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness came from imbalances between these humours, not from bacteria or viruses. To get better, you needed to restore balance. This often meant bleeding. Yes, bleeding. People were deliberately cut open to let out blood, sometimes with knives, sometimes with leeches. Doctors, who were mostly monks or university men in long robes, would examine your urine, your pulse, and your horoscope to decide how much blood to remove. A bowl was placed beneath your arm. A vein was opened. You might faint. You might feel better. Or you might simply die a little faster than you would have naturally. There were other treatments, of course. Some involved herbal remedies: nettle for fever, wormwood for digestion, willow bark for pain. These had varying degrees of success. But there were also stranger methods: wrapping yourself in animal skins, sleeping next to a dead mole, wearing amulets stuffed with dried frog legs. One charm for toothache involved rubbing your gums with a dead mouse. Another cure for plague required stuffing sweet-smelling herbs into your nose, or burning incense made of snake skin, myrrh, and dung. And then there was the fumigation. For serious diseases, a patient might be placed in a small hut or room where herbs and sulfur were burned, creating clouds of bitter, choking smoke meant to drive out the illness. The patient coughed, gasped, and often emerged no healthier, but slightly more scorched. People did their best with what they had. Cleanliness was linked with morality, especially for clergy. Monks bathed more frequently than peasants, sometimes twice a week if their order allowed it. They shaved their heads, scrubbed their hands before prayer, and washed their feet in symbolic rituals. But even monasteries had lice, rats, cold stone baths filled with greenish water. And the public bathhouse? A medieval luxury for townsfolk, often linked to health and socializing. Men and women sometimes bathed together, though not always. These establishments were simple, tubs or pools of heated water, sometimes scented with herbs. A bathhouse visit was a treat, a way to warm the bones in winter, clean off weeks of grime, and catch up on local gossip. But over time, many bathhouses were shut down or discouraged by the church, blamed for spreading disease or inspiring immoral behavior. Instead, people turned to dry washing, wiping down with cloths, changing linen more often, dabbing themselves with vinegar or rosewater if they were lucky. It was a different standard of hygiene, one shaped by scarcity, superstition, and survival. Even hand-washing wasn't a given. Some families rinsed before meals. Others didn't. You ate with your hands, tearing bread, scooping stew, licking grease from your fingers and wiping them on your tunic. Cutlery was rare, a shared knife, maybe a spoon carved from wood. Cleanliness was relative. You didn't expect to be fresh. You expected to endure. Now imagine settling into bed on that lumpy straw mattress. You scratch your arm again. A louse scuttles across your collarbone. The chamber pot is half full in the corner. The rushes on the floor haven't been changed in weeks. Your sibling's breath is warm on your neck. Your nose is half stuffed from smoke. And yet, sleep still comes. Because tomorrow is another day of dirt, and aching feet, and soot under your fingernails. Breathe slowly. The lice are drowsy now. The fire crackles faintly. And no one will ask if you brushed your teeth. Sleep, unwashed, but warm. Let's talk about food, or at least what counted as food in medieval Europe. You wake up hungry. Your stomach grumbles before you even sit up. But there's no pantry to raid. No kitchen glowing with warm light. Just a cold corner of the cottage, a wooden bowl, and maybe, if you're lucky, a lump of bread that hasn't gone completely hard. For most peasants, the day began and ended with the same meal, some version of porridge. It was called pottage, a gloopy, soupy mash of whatever grains and scraps you had on hand. Barley, oats, sometimes rye. You'd throw it all in a pot with water, maybe some old cabbage or dried peas, and let it boil over a smoky fire until it thickened into a sludge. There were no recipes, no seasoning except for salt, if you could afford it. Pottage was flexible, forgiving. If a carrot turned soft or a handful of lentils went dusty, they went into the pot. No waste, just fuel for another cold morning. Bread was the staple of the medieval diet, but it wasn't the crusty artisan loaf you're picturing. It was dense, hard, sometimes sour, often gritty, quite literally. Grain was ground by hand or at the local mill, and tiny bits of stone often ended up in the flour. Over time, this wore down teeth, leaving mouths full of stubs and exposed nerves. Still, bread was sacred. It symbolized life. It was offered at church, carried in baskets, broken by hand, given to children first, and if there wasn't enough, well, a mother might pretend she wasn't hungry that night. On feast days, the bread might be fresh, fluffy, even, but most days, it was stale by morning, too tough to chew unless dipped in broth or milk, or gnawed carefully with what teeth you had left. Protein? That was a luxury. Meat was rare for peasants. If you ate it, it was likely salted pork or smoked sausage, tough and chewy, more fat than flesh. Sometimes you got a bit of rabbit, or a bird caught in a snare. Eggs were precious. Chickens didn't always lay, and when they did, the eggs were divided, one for the baby, one for the sick grandfather, and the rest saved for market. Fish was holy food, and holy loophole. The church required fasting days, over 100 per year, when meat was forbidden. But fish wasn't considered meat. So people fished streams, rivers, even puddles, hoping to catch something that swam. Eels were common, slippery, bony, and oddly satisfying when grilled over coals. But most people didn't live near clean rivers. And when the fast days came, they simply skipped meat and ate more bread, more pottage, or maybe a dried apple if they had one tucked away in a sack. Fruits and vegetables were seasonal. You ate what was ripe, when it was ripe. In summer, peasants gorged on wild berries, windfall apples, and garden cabbages. In winter, food got thin. Root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, onions, kept best, buried in pits beneath the cottage floor. Preserving food was both art and necessity. You smoked meat over low fires. You pickled onions in vinegar. You salted fish until it was hard as leather. Butter, if churned, was buried in cool ground. Cheese aged slowly on wooden shelves, turning crusty and sour. Everything else was dried. Herbs, beans, pears, even mushrooms gathered from the forest with whispered prayers they weren't poisonous. And yes, food went bad. Mold crept into flour sacks. Maggots squirmed in meat. Rats nibbled through stored grain. Weevils floated in ale. Sometimes you just picked out the worst bits and ate anyway. Hunger didn't wait for perfection. Drinks? Water wasn't always safe. Streams were polluted by livestock and latrines. So people drank ale, weak, cloudy beer with barely any alcohol, but enough to kill some germs. Even children drank it. Wine was for nobles, and often mixed with herbs or honey to mask the sourness. Milk soured quickly. Fresh milk was a treat, but it rarely lasted a full day. Instead, you turned it into buttermilk, cheese, or curds, whatever you could before it spoiled in the summer heat. And then there was fasting. Not the trendy kind, the enforced kind. Church calendars dictated when you could and couldn't eat certain foods. Advent, Lent, Saints' days. No meat, no eggs, no dairy, just grains, fish, and prayer. Hunger was constant. Peasants didn't count calories, they counted crumbs. A poor harvest meant lean months. A bad winter meant children going to bed with empty bellies. People foraged for wild nettles, acorns, or bark. They boiled shoe leather. They crushed animal bones and simmered them for broth. Every scrap was precious. Meals were communal. One pot, one wooden spoon. Everyone dipped in. You didn't get your own bowl. You waited your turn. If you were slow, or small, or polite, you might end up licking the bottom of the pot. Still, there was laughter at the table. Even if the stew was thin. Even if the bread was dry. Even if a rat ran across the floor mid-meal and no one flinched. Some days brought surprises. A neighbor brought an onion. A cousin dropped off goat milk. The tanner's wife traded a wedge of cheese for mending her cloak. Feasts were rare but joyful. Harvest festivals, weddings, saints' days. The smell of roasting meat filled the village. Bells rang. Ale flowed. Children danced. Even the poor could feast, once in a while. Rich food, however, belonged to the nobility. Their tables groaned with roasted game, spice stews, and pastries filled with fruit. They ate from trenchers, stale bread used as plates, and tossed the scraps to dogs or beggars. Their cooks had access to imported spices, pepper, cinnamon, cloves. Dishes were sweet, savory, and sometimes suspicious. Pies contained birds. Custards hid meat. Sauces masked the scent of decay. And yet, for all the lavishness, nobles often ate the same things every day. Boar, pigeon, venison, over and over. Their food was rich, but repetitive. Back in your cottage, dinner is almost ready. The pottage bubbles. The fire crackles. Smoke curls upward, stinging your eyes. You tear off a chunk of bread and dip it in the stew. It's thin, but warm. You chew slowly, savoring the softness. A beetle floats to the top. You flick it away. A dog whines nearby. You toss it the crust. The day has been long. Your hands are sore. Your belly is fuller than it was this morning. And that, in the Middle Ages, is a blessing. Sleep now. The pot is empty. The bread is gone. And tomorrow, with any luck, there will be another meal. Thin, familiar, and just enough. Now, imagine waking up in the middle of the night, not to silence, but to the low grunt of a pig shifting beside the hearth. A sleepy chicken rustles its feathers near your straw mattress, and somewhere under the table, a goat is chewing something it definitely shouldn't. In the medieval world, animals weren't just on the farm. They were in the house. Literally. Cows, sheep, goats, chickens, pigs, all living under the same crooked roof, often in the same room as the humans who raised them. Why? Because warmth was precious, because barns were a luxury, and because when winter came with its icy breath and frozen mud, it was better to smell a little like cow dung than to freeze to death in the night. The medieval peasant's home wasn't designed for privacy. It wasn't even really designed for comfort. It was a shelter, a crude, practical box made of wattle and daub, roofed with thatch and floored with packed earth. And that packed earth was shared by the entire household, two-legged and four-legged alike. During the day, animals might wander the yard, snuffling for scraps or nibbling the thatch. But at night, or during storms, they were brought indoors. There was no sense letting your only pig catch a chill. Or worse, wander off. That pig might be your meat for the winter, or your daughter's wedding dowry. So into the house they came. Sometimes there was a low wall or wooden partition to separate the animals from the humans. Sometimes, more often, there was just an invisible line on the floor where the sleeping straw ended and the hoofprints began. Cows lay down with soft sighs, their great bulk radiating warmth. Chickens clucked and pecked at crumbs. Goats stood stubbornly, chewing their cud with smug satisfaction. Pigs snorted in their sleep, dreaming piggy dreams. And the smell? It was constant, pungent, familiar. Urine seeped into the dirt floor. Dung was swept away when someone remembered. Straw helped, but the scent of animals was layered into the very bones of the house. It mingled with smoke, sweat, and the damp wool of cloaks hung up to dry. You didn't notice it anymore. It was simply part of the air. In many households, animals weren't just tolerated, they were valued companions. Not like pets, but as sources of food, clothing, and fuel. A cow meant milk. A goat meant cheese. Chickens gave eggs, sometimes. Their droppings fertilized the garden. Their feathers padded your mattress, if you had one. Even dung had its purpose. Dried and compacted, it could be used as fuel for fires, or mixed with straw to seal drafty walls. Of course, there were downsides. You slipped in things. You stepped on things. You woke up with a chicken pecking at your hair or a goat munching on your tunic sleeve. Fleas and lice were part of life. But animals brought their own critters. Mites, ticks, and biting flies. Your bed straw itched not just from human passengers, but from whatever the pigs had rolled in earlier. And noise? Oh, the noise. A goat bleating at dawn. A rooster crowing at nothing. A pig squealing because another pig looked at it funny. Hooves clattered across the floor. Beaks tapped at wood. And when one animal got startled, the whole house stirred. Still, you got used to it. Some homes were built with animals in mind. The house might be split, humans on one side, animals on the other. The cow stall would have a trough built into the wall. The floor might slope gently to allow waste to drain. But for poorer peasants, there was no separation. Everyone huddled together. One big, snorting, snoring family. Children grew up with animals like siblings. They learned to milk goats before they could write their names. They chased chickens for fun and helped birth lambs in the mud. They knew which pig was grouchy, which cow had a limp, and which hen laid the best eggs. Illness, of course, spread easily. Zoonotic diseases didn't have a name yet, but they existed. Coughs passed from animal to human. Wounds got infected. Parasites crossed species without hesitation. But there were no veterinarians. No antibiotics. Just herbal salves, whispered prayers, and tough luck. Despite the mess and the risk, this arrangement worked. It was survival. And sometimes, in the dead of winter, it was the only thing standing between a family and the cold. Imagine waking up in the early hours, wrapped in a rough wool blanket, breath misting in the air. Beside you, your child stirs. Beyond her, a sheep shifts its weight, hooves thudding softly. You reach for the fire, coaxing embers to life. The pig snorts. The goat sneezes. It's not elegant. It's not peaceful. But it's warm. You stir the morning pot, stepping carefully over a sleeping chicken. You scoop water into a wooden bucket. The cow lows softly, expecting hay. Outside, the frost sparkles on the grass. But inside, life continues, warm, messy, alive. And if your neighbor complains that your pig got into their laundry again, you shrug. Tomorrow, it might be their goat in your turnips. It's just the way things are. Now, rest your head. Picture a flickering hearth, a soft snuffle beside you, the gentle weight of wool across your shoulders. Outside, the wind howls, but in here, the animals sleep. The fire crackles, and the old house holds its breath until morning. The rooster crowed, not because it was morning, but because it always crowed. Still dark, still damp, the fire barely a whisper under the ashes. You pull yourself from the itchy straw, careful not to knock over the wooden bucket beside the bed, half full of last night's bath water, or maybe laundry water, or both. Your back already aches. Outside, the village stirs. A cough here, a grunt there, the soft clank of a pail against a stone. Morning has begun, not with ceremony, but with obligation. The medieval day's labor started early and ended late. There were no weekends, no sick leave, no concept of a day off, unless the priest said so, and even then, someone still had to feed the animals. Work was not a lifestyle. It was survival. If you were a peasant, you worked the land, but not your land. You toiled on the Lord's fields for most of the week, and if you were lucky, managed to scrape out time for your own small strip of soil, where beans, barley, and hope tried to grow. The day began with chores, always chores. Water from the well, firewood from the edge of the forest, feed for the animals, milking the goats, turning the compost, scrubbing something, a pan, a floor, a shirt stiff with sweat and straw. Something always needed scrubbing. Then came the fieldwork, ploughing, if you had an ox. If not, you ploughed with your own shoulders and a spade. Harrowing, weeding, gathering manure, sowing seeds. The soil was stubborn, often rocky, always wet or dry at the wrong times. Your feet sank in muck, your hands cracked from cold and grain stubble. You worked bent at the waist, your body a question mark by age 30. And you weren't alone. Children worked too, not in some symbolic way, but as real labor. They herded geese, collected kindling, watched babies, chased rats from grain stores. By 7 or 8, they were practically apprentices in survival. Women spun wool, baked bread, churned butter, combed lice from scalps, made cheese, brewed ale, and patched every tunic and stocking with scraps. All while keeping children from falling in wells or setting themselves on fire. Men mended roofs, chopped timber, repaired carts, and cursed at mules that wouldn't cooperate. Even the elderly, twisted by arthritis or blinded by cataracts, were set to shelling peas or sorting beans. No idle hands. No luxury of boredom. Time was marked by bells, church bells, mostly. Morning bell, noon bell, evening bell. They reminded you of prayer, but also that another hour had passed. And you were still hoeing, still lifting, still aching. The sun rose slowly, and it wasn't kind. By mid-morning, you were damp with sweat, whether it was summer or not. Wool was heavy. Layers were necessary. But comfort? That was for saints. Lunch wasn't a break, just fuel. Maybe bread, some weak ale, a bite of cheese if you were blessed. You didn't sit down to eat. You squatted, leaned, or chewed while walking. Then it was back to it. Fields, markets, looms, ovens, livestock, thatched roofs to patch, leaks to fix, ashes to sweep, walls to whitewash. Some worked as tradesmen. The blacksmith's forge was hot, dangerous, and full of smoke. The cobbler hunched over shoes too worn to be worth mending. The miller dealt with heavy stones and complaints about short measures. The tanner worked with animal hides and lye, a job so smelly they were often forced to live on the edge of town. Others worked in towns as servants, scullery maids, or apprentices to butchers, brewers or bakers. These jobs were often brutal, the hours long, and the pay close to nothing. But at least you weren't out in the rain. Winter didn't slow anything down. It made it worse. The ground froze. Water became ice. Everything was harder to do, colder to touch, and more miserable to endure. Your fingers stung as you chopped wood. Your breath froze in your mustache. Your boots, if you had them, were full of holes. And when night fell, the work didn't stop. Dinner needed cooking. Tools needed cleaning. Threads needed spinning. Beds needed turning. You squeezed in everything while the fire still glowed. You worked until your body gave out, until your hands dropped the ladle, or the axe slipped, or your eyes blurred trying to patch a tunic by firelight. There was no reward, no pension, no recognition, no praise, just another day. If you were lucky, you lived long enough to complain about how easy the youth had it now. And even that wasn't guaranteed. In town, work meant guilds and regulation, but also long hours. Candlemakers, fishmongers, woodcutters, coopers, thatchers. You did your job until your fingers didn't work anymore, or until someone younger did it better and cheaper. On feast days, you paused, not to rest, but to pray. Maybe the priest handed out bread. Maybe there was music or drink. But even on holidays, your chores didn't vanish. The animals still needed feeding. The children still needed watching. And there was always something broken. The cartwheel, the water bucket, your back. Some jobs were worse than others. Grave diggers, gong farmers, those brave souls who cleaned out latrines. Leech collectors, executioners, rat catchers. Not glamorous, not clean, but necessary. If you were a serf, your work was not your own. You owed it to your lord. You owed your time, your sweat, sometimes your livestock, sometimes your children. And if you couldn't meet your quotas, then came the fines. Or worse, the stocks. Still, the rhythm of labor gave life a strange kind of structure. You knew what to expect. Spring was for sowing. Summer was for weeding. Autumn was for harvest. Winter was for mending. Every season came with aches, with fatigue, with too much to do and too little time. But it was predictable. You did the work. You prayed the crop would grow. You hoped you'd stay healthy. And if the heavens smiled, you made it through another year. Now, as you lie still under soft blankets, think of a body curled on a straw mat, feet blistered, hands cracked, stomach half full. The rooster is silent. The fields are quiet. For a few short hours, even the hardest worker gets to rest. Let your breath slow. Let the aches fade. And let the village sleep. Step carefully now. The street is not what you'd call clean. Between crooked wooden houses leaning like tired drunks and crumbling stone walls patched with straw and prayer, a muddy path wins its way into the heart of the medieval town. It's more of a trench than a road, filled with the thick, sloshing soup of rainwater, manure, rotting food, and things better left unidentified. This is not a fairy tale village. This is the town square, the hub, the nerve center of trade, gossip, noise, and smells that defy polite description. The buildings close in tightly on both sides, jutting out overhead like canopies, as if the upper stories of each house were leaning in to eavesdrop on the chaos below. Wooden beams creak under their own weight. Tattered shutters flap lazily in the wind. Smoke dribbles from chimneys like tired sighs. Beneath them, the market. And oh, the market is alive. Vendors shout, bark, and plead in every direction. Fresh turnips, just pulled from the mud. Fine wool cloaks, barely moth-eaten. Rats? No, these are hedgehogs. Men and women crowd around makeshift stalls, simple carts or worn tables propped on barrels. Children weave through legs with sticky fingers. Dogs bark and snap at dropped crusts. A pig squeals in protest as it's dragged by a rope through the crowd. Smells swirl together like a storm. Baking bread from the baker's corner hearth. Sour wine sloshed from jugs. Fish, fresh, maybe, laid out on boards, already drawing flies. Human sweat, horse droppings, and the cloying perfume of a merchant's cheap incense. All of it mixes with the ever-present dampness of stone and would left too long in the rain. The mud squelches beneath your feet, threatening to suck off a boot or swallow your soul. But you keep walking. On one side of the square, a man sharpens knives on a spinning wheel, the rasp of metal on stone ringing out over the din nearby. A woman with a face like a weathered apple hawks bundles of leeks and onions from a basket on her hip. She eyes each passerby with the precision of someone who's been cheated too many times. A beggar leans against a wall, cradling a wooden bowl and a stump where his leg used to be. He murmurs a prayer or a curse, sometimes both. People toss him scraps. A child stops to stare before being yanked away by a red-faced mother. There are no clean lines here, no organization, just the fluid chaos of barter and survival. Coins clink, hands argue, bread is broken. A fight almost breaks out over a stolen chicken. A man accuses another of watering down his ale. Two women slap each other with aprons over a bruised pear. Just another market day. And somewhere among the crowd, a town crier steps onto a crate. He bangs a bell, shouts the latest proclamation from the local lord, something about new taxes, new laws, or a new punishment for thievery. No one listens. Not really, but the bell rings anyway, and for a moment, people pretend to care. You wander on, ducking beneath a laundry line strung between two buildings, dripping water onto your shoulder. Above, someone empties a chamber pot from a window with a casual yell of "Where below?" You sidestep just in time. You've learned. The alleys are narrow, paved only in filth. Rats scurry across doorways. Cats watch from rooftops with one eye closed and the other full of judgment. Here, you pass the butcher's stall, hooks strung with unidentifiable cuts of meat. Flies swarm in ecstasy. The butcher grins through a mouthful of missing teeth. He offers you something fresh. You decline. Next, a barber surgeon's shack. Outside, a red and white striped pole spins lazily. An invitation or a warning, depending on your health. He pulls teeth, lances boils, and cuts hair, all with the same knife. The floor is stained. The basin has seen too much. Further down, a man sells miracle potions. Bottles of colored liquid labeled with symbols and promises. One cures boils. Another wards off demons. A third claims to reverse baldness. He's smiling. His teeth are too white. Something's off. Behind him, a troupe of jugglers performs. 3 boys in patched tunics tossing apples, knives, and flaming sticks in the air. Children clap. A lute plays somewhere. For a moment, joy breaks through the grime. You keep walking. Around the corner, the stocks. A drunkard sleeps with his head slumped through the wooden frame, mouth open, flies buzzing. Someone has thrown old cabbage leaves at him. A boy pokes him with a stick. No one stops him. In the center of town, there's a raised wooden platform. The gallows. It's empty today, but the noose still swings gently in the breeze. A reminder that justice here is not a theory, it's a public event. Executions, whippings, public shaming, these are the town's entertainment. People gather, not out of cruelty, but out of boredom. And perhaps a bit of fear. The church stands nearby, stern and soot-streaked. Its bell tolls at odd hours. Inside, stone saints frown down from alcoves. The priest thunders about sin on Sunday, then haggles over the price of wool on Monday. A few wealthy homes line the square, their doors made of heavier wood, their windows glazed with real glass. Here live the merchant elite, the cloth traders, moneylenders, guildmasters. Their chimneys puff with imported coal. Their pigs are fatter. Their boots are cleaner. But not much. Even the rich here breathe the same smoke, trip over the same cobbles, and dodge the same flying chamber pots. At night, the town grows quiet, but never truly silent. Shutters close. Candles flicker behind crooked windows. The market stalls vanish. Dogs roam. A drunk sings off-key. A baby wails somewhere. Thunder growls over the thatched rooftops. And the mud, always the mud, thickens in the rain. The watchman patrols with a lantern and a cudgel, mumbling to himself. He checks the gates, glances at shadows, tries not to think about thieves, wolves, or things that crawl where the torchlight doesn't reach. Somewhere, a rat falls into a bucket. Somewhere, someone prays for morning. And now, as you lie beneath warm blankets, far from muddy boots and drunken songs, imagine the market slowly fading into sleep. Imagine the laughter drifting upward through slanted rooftops, the smell of bread cooling in stone ovens, the hush of wheels settling on wooden carts. Let your breath slow, let the bells fall silent, and sleep as the medieval town exhales, noisy, smelly, stubborn, but somehow still standing. Let's talk about it. The one thing everyone had to deal with every single day, no matter their wealth, their rank, or the number of prayers they whispered into the smoky rafters. Where to go when nature called. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't private, and it definitely wasn't hygienic. There were no porcelain thrones in medieval Europe, no flushing, no seat warmers, no little sprays of rose-scented mist. Just holes, buckets, pits, and a whole lot of communal awkwardness. Let's start with the peasants, because they made up the bulk of medieval life. If you lived in the countryside, which most people did, your bathroom was, quite literally, the bushes. A cluster of trees beyond the field. A quiet dip behind the barn. A patch of tall grass you hoped no one else had recently used. If it was raining, too bad. If it was freezing, well, you'd better be quick. Some families had what they politely referred to as a privy. That usually meant a small wooden shack out back, perched over a pit in the ground. No plumbing, no lining, just a hole, and beneath it, the slow, cold accumulation of human waste, visited by flies, frogs, and the occasional rat who'd gotten very lost. There was no toilet paper. That's a modern luxury. In the Middle Ages, wiping was creative. People used moss if they were lucky, or hay, leaves, old cloths, or the corner of a tunic if desperation called. Sometimes, a smooth stick. Sometimes, nothing. A brisk walk through the grass might be the end of the experience. You did what you had to, and then you got on with your day. If you lived in a town or city, the situation was different, but not necessarily better. Space was tighter, crowds were denser, and the waste had to go somewhere. Some houses had a bucket or chamber pot, hidden in a corner or under the bed. It was used at night, or when the streets were too dangerous to wander. And in the morning, well, you picked it up, leaned out the window, and tossed it into the street. With a warning, of course. People didn't want to be splashed, after all. So before emptying a pot full of last night's beer and regrets, the custom was to shout, "Garde l'eau," French for "watch out for the water." Of course, not everyone was paying attention. And so, unlucky passers-by were occasionally anointed from above. A surprise baptism in chamber pot juice. A lesson in walking close to the walls and always listening for shouted warnings. The streets, unsurprisingly, were disgusting. Narrow alleys ran with runoff from homes, shops, stables, and open latrines. Gutters, if they existed, were shallow and poorly maintained. Rain just made the mess slashier. Sun baked it into a crust. Some towns had public latrines, shared spaces with long benches and a row of holes, like a medieval version of a porta-potty lounge. These were social affairs. You'd sit, chat, and do your business shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, friends, and strangers. Privacy was not a concern. Smell, apparently, was tolerated. Beneath these latrines, waste often drained into cesspits. Deep holes dug into the earth and periodically emptied by unfortunate souls known as gong farmers. Gong farmers were professionals, of a very specific kind. They climbed down into the pits at night, armed with shovels, buckets, and the world's strongest stomachs. They scooped out the filth by hand, hauled it away in carts, and dumped it somewhere outside town. The stench followed them like a shadow. But strangely, gong farmers were paid well. No one wanted to do what they did, but it was necessary. Without them, entire towns would sink into their own sewage. In castles and monasteries, things were marginally more advanced, if still utterly grim. Many had guardrobes, small rooms built into the outer wall of a building, with a stone or wooden bench and a hole that opened straight down, into a moat or a pit or the open air. The idea was simple. Sit, relieve yourself, and let gravity do the rest. But the execution? Not ideal. Moats weren't just for defense. In many cases, they were a giant open sore, collecting not only rainwater but also excrement, dead animals, kitchen scraps, and laundry runoff. They stank in summer, froze in winter, and no one went swimming, not unless they'd committed a terrible crime. Inside the guardrobe, there might be a cloth curtain for modesty. Some had stone seats with multiple holes for group use, and sometimes wealthy castles even placed their guardrobes directly above pigsties. Why? Because the pigs would eat it. Yes, that happened. Cleaning yourself afterwards still required creativity. Wealthy nobles might use bits of cloth or sponge. Monks sometimes used pages torn from old manuscripts, much to the horror of modern historians. And then there's the urine thing. Urine wasn't just waste. It was useful. People collected it in jars and buckets, let it ferment into a pungent liquid called lard, and used it as a powerful cleaner, especially for laundry. Why? Because urine contains ammonia, which cuts through grease and stains. So yes, medieval laundry was soaked in pee, stomped in, swirled, rinsed in rivers, and then dried in the sun. Clean, sort of. Smelling fresh, depending on your definition. But the real problem with medieval sanitation wasn't just the lack of privacy or the smells, it was disease. Human waste, when left to pile up in streets, moats, and water supplies, turns towns into breeding grounds for infection. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, parasites, all flourished. Water sources were often contaminated. Wells were dug too close to latrines. Rivers carried waste downstream, right into the mouths of the next village. And yet, people kept drinking, bathing, and washing in these waters because there wasn't much choice. Even when people noticed that bad smells made them ill, they didn't understand the true cause. The miasma theory, the idea that bad air caused sickness, dominated medieval thinking. The concept of germs? Still centuries away. Some tried to combat it with sweet-smelling herbs, incense, and vinegar-soaked sponges tied to their noses. But the source remained, underfoot, in buckets, trickling down alleys, gathering in pits. Sanitation laws did exist, in theory. Town councils occasionally issued proclamations forbidding the dumping of waste in the streets, requiring cesspits to be emptied, or banning pigs from wandering freely through market stalls. But enforcement was rare. Fines were small, and the mess was constant. By night, thieves might sneak through the shadows to rob an unattended bucket. By day, children played in puddles that carried more than rainwater. And so, the cycle continued. Now, as you lie beneath clean sheets, with your modern plumbing and gently humming bathroom fan, imagine crouching behind a wooden shack in the freezing dark. Imagine stepping carefully between puddles in a street where every window could empty a surprise onto your head. Imagine wiping with moss, with leaves, or with nothing at all. And then, let that image drift away. The smell fades, the chamber pot is empty, and the night is quiet. Sleep now, the guardrobe is far behind you, and no one's shouting "Guard Lou" from the window above. Close your eyes, and try to picture the perfect medieval outfit. You might imagine a knight in gleaming armor, or a noblewoman draped in flowing velvet. Silks, furs, brocades embroidered with gold thread. But that wasn't your wardrobe. No, you're a peasant, maybe a townsman, a baker, a washerwoman, a shepherd. Your clothes aren't tailored. They're not glamorous, and they definitely don't fit well. They're itchy, they're heavy, they're always damp in the wrong places, and you've probably been wearing the same thing for weeks. Let's start with the basics. For most people, the primary fabric of the Middle Ages was wool. It was warm, durable, and relatively easy to produce. Sheep were everywhere, clattering through fields, baaing in courtyards, staring blankly as they grew their own future tunics. But wool was rough, especially the stuff spun for the lower classes. No one was brushing or carding it for comfort. No soft underlayers. No merino luxury. Just thick, scratchy cloth, woven into tunics, hoods, and hose that chafed your thighs and clung to your armpits. Underneath the wool, if you were lucky, you might have a linen undershirt, a shift or chemise, but don't count on it being fresh. Linen was cooler and softer, made from flax, but it took work to produce. Most peasants only had one set of underclothes, two if they were incredibly fortunate. So when it got dirty, which it always did, you kept wearing it anyway. There were no wardrobes full of options, no color coordination. You didn't get dressed in the modern sense. You simply put on what you had. Usually, a tunic, some hose, a belt or rope to hold it together, and a hood or cloak for warmth. And then you hoped it didn't rain, because wet wool is a special kind of torture. It soaks up moisture like a sponge, becomes twice as heavy, and smells like something that crawled out of a sheep's backside and never found its way home. And in a world without indoor heating or hair dryers, it could take days to dry, clinging to your skin the whole time like a cold, woolen leech. Shoes? Not guaranteed. Many peasants went barefoot most of the year. When they did have footwear, it was usually a pair of turn shoes, simple leather soles stitched together with thread, offering almost no arch support, heel cushion, or waterproofing. You could feel every pebble, every puddle, every sharp stick on your way to the fields. And in winter, good luck. Some people wrapped their feet in cloth. Others lined their shoes with straw or moss. The result was still wet, cold, and blister-inducing. Toes turned red, cracked, or numb. Frostbite wasn't common, but misery was. Now let's talk about layers. If you lived in a cold region, and most of Europe qualifies, you'd wear multiple tunics. Maybe a surcoat or an overgown. These were often the same cut as your normal clothes, just thicker, piled on, belted tighter, pulled up around your ears and shoulders when the wind blew through the cracks in your home. There were no zippers, no buttons, at least not for most of the period. Just laces, ties, and fibulae, brooches, pins, or cleverly folded fasteners to keep things from falling off. Which, to be fair, still happened. The wealthy had fancier options, of course. Their tunics were dyed in vivid colors, reds, blues, purples, made with expensive pigments like madder root, woad, or imported indigo. Their fabrics were finer: velvet, silk, damask, fur. They wore hose that were shaped and sewn to fit each leg, tied at the waist with a complex arrangement of cords and eyelets. Some noblemen even wore codpieces, padded flaps that, shall we say, emphasized their assets, though this trend peaked later in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. The fashion elite didn't just want to stay warm, they wanted to impress. Nobles sported pointed shoes so long they had to be tied to the knees. Ladies wore hennins, towering cone-shaped hats with veils drifting like flags. Cloaks trailed on the ground, sleeves brushed the floor, and embroidered patterns showed off wealth even when standing still. But with extravagance came impracticality. A long cloak was beautiful, until it dragged through mud, horse dung, or chamber pot runoff. And a velvet gown didn't do much good in a smoky room filled with open flames. The line between fashionable and flammable was often very thin. And beneath all that finery, fleas, lice, mites. They didn't care about your social status. They lived in the seams, the linings, the folds of your hood or the hem of your tunic. They bit, they bred, and they stayed. Combs and fumigation helped, but not much. You might wear a ribbon of lavender or rosemary tied around your wrist or neck, hoping the scent would drive the pests away. Or carry a pomander, a ball filled with herbs, pressed to your nose to mask the sour odor of unwashed skin and stale wool. But really, there was no escape. Because in medieval Europe, laundry was a luxury. Washing your clothes meant hauling water from a stream or well, boiling it over a smoky fire, and scrubbing your garments with lye, ashes, or even fermented urine. Yes, again, before pounding them clean with stones or clubs. Drying them took time, and indoor space, and warm air that most homes didn't have. So most people wore their clothes until they were visibly filthy. Stains accumulated like tree rings. Smells lingered like ghosts. Repairs were constant. Patches, stitches, darning. A single tunic might survive for a decade, handed down through siblings or even generations. and fashion was heavily regulated by sumptuary laws. In many regions, laws dictated what you could wear based on your class. A peasant couldn't wear silk. A merchant couldn't wear ermine. Colors, fabrics, and even types of shoes were forbidden if you didn't belong to the right rank. Break the rules, and you could be fined, or worse, accused of pretending to be nobility, which was dangerous in a time when status meant everything. The church, too, weighed in. Pride was a sin. Vanity led to temptation. So clerics denounced fancy clothing, short tunics, or plunging necklines as pathways to moral collapse. But people still wanted to look good. A new belt, a scrap of fur at the collar, a tunic dyed a little brighter than your neighbor's. Even the poorest villagers longed for a touch of style, something to set them apart at market or festival. Because even when life was filthy and cold, people still cared about how they looked. Now, as you lie beneath a clean blanket, in pajamas chosen for comfort, not class, imagine pulling a scratchy wool tunic over your head. Feel the itch at your neck, the roughness behind your knees. Imagine your only shoes falling apart at the seams, your socks made of bundled straw. Imagine sharing that tunic with your sibling, patching it again, sleeping in it, working in it, wearing it until it gives up before you do. And then, let it go. The laces are undone. The hood is off. Sleep now, warm, clean, and blissfully unwoolen. It's nighttime now in your medieval village. The sun has long since slipped behind the hills, leaving only the last embers of twilight glowing dimly through a slit of a window, if your home even has one. More likely, there's a wooden shutter or a hanging animal skin flapping faintly in the breeze. Inside your one-room cottage, it's not silent. Not even close. The soft crackle of the hearth competes with the muffled breathing of your family, the cluck of a hen settling on a rafter beam, the snort of a pig shifting in its sleep, and the distant bark of a dog somewhere in the village square. The night has its own rhythm, not peaceful, not quiet, but steady. And in this little space, you must now try to sleep. If you're lucky, you have a straw mattress, though mattress may be too generous a word. It's more like a bag, maybe linen, maybe burlap, loosely filled with dry grass, feathers, or reeds. Over time, the straw flattens into clumps and collects dust, fleas, and the occasional mouse nest. There's no real bed frame, just the mattress on the dirt floor. Or, if your family is slightly better off, a low wooden platform, its joints creaking every time you shift. For warmth, you might have a woolen blanket, a fur pelt, or simply your own clothes, the same tunic you wore all day. You don't change into sleepwear. Sleepwear isn't a thing. You just remove your belt and curl up as you are, hoping the day's grime doesn't freeze to your skin by morning. You're not sleeping alone. Not unless you're a hermit, a widow, or very unlucky. More likely, you share the bed with your entire family. Parents, children, a cousin, maybe a grandmother. You nestle together for warmth, back to back, front to front, everyone twisted like spoons in a crooked drawer. There's no pillow, but someone's arm or sack of grain might do in a pinch. If you're a child, you're probably sleeping closest to the wall, the coldest spot, but the safest from being rolled onto. If you're older, you might lie near the fire, hoping it doesn't go out and leave the cottage ice cold by dawn. But even as your eyes close, sleep doesn't come easily, because medieval sleep wasn't like ours. People in this time often followed what we now call a segmented sleep pattern. That meant 2 separate sleep periods, broken up by a couple of hours in the middle of the night. You'd drift off after dusk, then wake around midnight, not by choice, but as part of your natural rhythm. During that waking period, people might tend the fire, pray, smoke a pipe, or even visit neighbors. Yes, imagine climbing out of your straw bed, wrapping a cloak around your shoulders, and trudging through the mud to gossip in someone else's smoky hut at 1:30 a.m. Then you'd return for a second sleep, hoping it was deeper and dreamless. But even if you stayed in bed, nighttime wasn't peaceful. The chamber pot sat in the corner, sour-smelling and already half full. If you had to use it, you did so quietly and quickly, hoping not to wake a sibling or startle the pig, who might snort loudly in protest. The fire needed tending or it would die. Someone always forgot to bank the coals. You'd have to get up, groggy and barefoot, to shuffle over, poke the embers, add kindling, and blow gently until the orange glow returned. And then there were the noises. The roof creaked under the wind. Mice skittered in the rafters. Owls hooted. Wolves howled in the distance. Sometimes the wind itself moaned through the gaps in the thatch like a ghost calling out your name. And of course, there were the lice. Everyone had them. They lived in your hair, your clothes, your blankets. They feasted on your blood while you slept, and you scratched without even waking. Some nights, the itching was so fierce, so maddening, it brought people to tears. So you fidgeted. You scratched. You listened. You waited for sleep to return. But maybe sleep was interrupted by something worse. A baby crying, too young to understand why the night is cold and her stomach is empty. Or the wet cough of a sick child. Or a thump, someone rolled off the mattress. Or a shout in the distance. Was it laughter or something darker? Sometimes it was a fire. The shriek of warning from a neighbor's house. Flames licking at the thatch. Neighbors running with buckets, barefoot in the dark, forming a desperate line to the well. Fires spread fast. Whole villages burned down in a single windy night. Or perhaps you woke to a knocking at the door. A messenger, a tax collector, a man with a knife, or a priest bringing news of death. Midnight visits never meant good things. And yet, in spite of all this, people did sleep. Somehow, they dreamt of better harvests, of mended shoes, of dancing at a feast, of warm meat and sweet ale, of a quieter night, someday. When dreams came, they were vivid, charged, lit by candlelight and shadow. People believed dreams carried messages from saints, warnings from spirits, or signs from the devil himself. You might wake up sweaty, heart racing, clutching the wooden cross around your neck, whispering a prayer into the darkness, and then roll over and try again. Some had bed curtains, rich people, mostly, to keep out the drafts and curious eyes. But most just pulled a blanket over their head and hoped to forget the cold for a little while. Rats might sniff near your feet. A spider might crawl across your face. But if the house was still standing, and no one had a fever, it counted as a good night. As you lie now in a quiet room, the hum of electricity in the background, soft cotton against your skin, and no pigs or lice to bother you, try to imagine that old cottage. Imagine the uneven floor beneath you, the damp straw poking your back, the sour air and the dry mouth and the soft snores of a sibling by your ear. Feel the fire dying. Feel your limbs grow heavy. Feel your worries fade into the smoke curling toward the beams. Outside, wolves still howl. But inside, the baby has stopped crying. The scratching has quieted. And if you're lucky, the dreams will come soon. So you've made it through another long, cold night on a straw mattress shared with your entire family, a pig and several generations of lice. You wake up groggy, scratch your arm, and notice something troubling, a red, swollen lump where your elbow should be. It throbs with every heartbeat, hot and stiff and angry. You're sick, or injured, or both. And in medieval Europe, that's bad news. Because here, illness isn't a temporary nuisance. It's a terrifying roll of the dice. A scratch could become a death sentence. A fever might steal your child before sunrise. And treatment? Let's just say that if the illness doesn't kill you, the cure might. Let's start with the basics. You've cut your hand on a rusted plowshare. Nothing dramatic, just a nick. But now it's swelling. The skin is red, stretched tight, and smells a bit off. You don't know the word infection. You don't know about bacteria. What you do know is that something's wrong, and the wise woman in the next village over might know how to fix it. She arrives with a pouch of herbs, a carved stick, and a calm voice. She's seen worse, she says. She mashes up a poultice of garlic and moldy bread, which, by strange luck, might actually have antimicrobial effects, and binds it with a cloth that used to be part of someone's apron. She mutters a prayer to Saint Sebastian, protector against plague, just in case. And then, you wait. Because medieval medicine is as much hope as it is science. If you're wealthy or close to a monastery, you might summon a physician. He arrives in a fur-lined cloak, with a long nose and a longer list of theories. He doesn't examine the wound so much as ask you about your humors, those 4 mysterious fluids believed to control all health: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. He decides your humors are out of balance. You're too hot and moist, clearly. The treatment? Bloodletting. Out comes the bowl. Out comes the leech. Or the knife. You watch, dazed, as your lifeblood drains into a pewter cup. Maybe that swelling in your arm fades a bit. Or maybe your vision dims, and you slide sideways into unconsciousness. But hey, your humors are probably balanced now. That's just one form of common treatment. Got a headache? You might be told to sniff a mixture of ground rose petals and vinegar. A stomachache? Try boiled mint leaves mashed with honey or crushed toads, depending on who's advising you. Toothache? Apply a hot poker to the jawline, or chew on cloves until the pain becomes background noise. Fevers? Try bathing in urine. Your own, if you're lucky. Or maybe, just maybe, you've been cursed. Because not all illness is physical in the medieval mind. It could be spiritual. A punishment from God. A hex from a jealous neighbor. An evil spirit creeping under your skin. That's when you call in the church. The local priest arrives, swinging incense and chanting Latin verses. He might offer you holy water, relics of a saint, or a special prayer scrawled onto parchment and tied around your neck. For the truly desperate, a pilgrimage is recommended. Limp your way to the nearest holy shrine and hope a miracle waits in the shadow of a saint's bones. Speaking of miracles, let's talk about some of the more creative remedies you might encounter. Swallowing powdered emerald for stomach issues. Good luck affording emeralds. Wearing a dead mole around your neck to prevent toothaches. Pressing a live frog against a boil until it draws out the sickness. Inhaling dried wolf dung to stop nosebleeds. It all sounds absurd, until you realize these were the only options. With no understanding of germ theory, people clung to folklore, tradition, and prayer. And when all else failed, they waited. Wounds festered, fevers burned, bodies withered. Let's not forget childbirth, either. If you're a woman in labor, there's no hospital bed waiting, no sterile gloves, no epidural. You lie on a rough bed, gripping your sister's hand, while the village midwife boils linens and murmurs encouragement. The baby might be breech. The cord might wrap around its neck. The mother might bleed out. Infection might follow within hours. Half of all children never reach adulthood, and many mothers die bringing them into the world. If you're lucky, the baby cries. You cry. Everyone cries. And then, you hope. But even if you survive childbirth, injury, or sickness, disability looms. A broken leg might never heal straight. A crushed finger could mean the end of your trade. A serious fever might leave your child blind, or deaf, or forever weakened. And there are no safety nets, no surgeries, no antibiotics, no physical therapy. You just adapt, or starve. Now picture a plague year. The Great Pestilence, they call it. The one we now know as the Black Death. You hear rumors at first, of whole villages empty, of ships with no living crew. Then, one morning, your neighbor coughs up blood. By nightfall, he's gone, and the sickness spreads. Swollen lymph nodes, blackened limbs, vomiting, seizures, delirium. People paint crosses on doors. Processions march through the streets, men whipping themselves bloody to beg for divine forgiveness. Fires burn in every town square, meant to purify the air. Cats and beggars are blamed. Priests die. Doctors vanish. Fields rot. And the bells never stop ringing. Death is always close in the medieval world. If not from disease, then from violence. If not from violence, then from accident. Fall off a ladder? Good luck walking again. Burn your arm on the hearth? Pray it doesn't fester. Cut yourself with a rusty sickle? Hope you're one of the lucky ones. Yet through it all, people endure. They find strange comforts. They wear amulets against illness, carved bones, scraps of scripture, twisted bits of metal. They brew herbal teas from hedgerow plants, nettle, yarrow, chamomile, mint. They sit beside the sick and tell stories to distract them. They whisper to saints in the candlelight. They sing lullabies to the dying. They light fires for warmth and leave bowls of water out for wandering spirits. Because in a world where medicine is a prayer and healing is a miracle, hope is the strongest remedy of all. So now, as you lie comfortably in a bed with real sheets, a thermostat on the wall, and access to paracetamol and penicillin, imagine instead curling up on a straw mat with a burning fever. No thermometer, no diagnosis, only the crackle of the fire, the smell of garlic poultice, and the quiet chant of someone, a mother, a priest, a friend, begging whatever gods will listen to let you wake up in the morning. You've made it through another day of medieval life, aching from labor, half-fed, and reeking faintly of garlic and wet wool. You lie down on your straw mat, tucking your ragged cloak around your shoulders. The fire's burned low. The thatch above your head whispers in the wind. You close your eyes and scratch. There it is again, that tiny, persistent itch behind your knee. Then another on your neck. And now your scalp feels like it's crawling. Because it is. Welcome to the world of fleas and lice, your constant bedtime companions. They don't care how tired you are. They don't care if you've scrubbed with rosemary or fumigated your tunic with mint smoke. They're here, and they're hungry. Fleas nest in your mattress, in the folds of your cloak, in the seams of your boots. Lice weave their way through your hair, laying eggs with admirable dedication. You pick at the nits by candlelight, squinting through the smoke. But it's a losing battle. The lice always come back. Even nobility gets lice. Even monks. Even queens. In medieval Europe, personal hygiene is more of an aspiration than a reality, and parasites are democratic. You might try burning sulfur under your bed to drive them out, or dust your body with crushed herbs and ashes. Some smear goose fat on their skin to trap the fleas, then scrape it off with a blunt knife. Others rub themselves with vinegar and salt. None of it works for long. You scratch until your skin breaks. Welts rise. Scabs form. You scratch more. And then, one year, something worse arrives. Not just itchy. Not just annoying. Something apocalyptic. A plague. The stories start from the coast. A strange sickness aboard merchant ships. Entire crews dead before the sails are lowered. Then the ports shut down, but it's too late. Rats scurry from ship to dock. Fleas leap from rats to humans. And the Black Death begins. At first, you hear whispers. A man down the road is sick. He has swellings, black lumps under his arms, behind his knees. He vomits blood. He screams in the night. By morning, he's dead. By afternoon, his wife joins him. Then the neighbors. Then the priest who came to read last rites. The buboes, they call them, those terrible swellings. They grow fast, hot and purple and foul-smelling. Some burst, others don't. People stagger through the streets, feverish and confused. Some collapse mid-step. Some claw at their throats, choking on blood. The air feels thick, still. Birdsong stops. Markets close. Church bells toll endlessly. You try to run, maybe flee to the countryside. But the countryside is dying too. Entire villages vanish. Carts filled with the dead roll through town, pulled by silent horses. Bring out your dead, the collectors cry, clanging bells as they pass. No one touches the bodies. Hooks are used to drag them from doorways. Piles burn in ditches. The smell, you cannot describe the smell. It clings to your nostrils, your hair, your dreams. In some towns, priests stop giving funerals. Gravediggers collapse into the holes they've dug. Parents abandon sick children. Children abandon dying parents. In other towns, people lash themselves in public. Flagellants, they're called, hoping that punishment will cleanse their souls. Their backs are raw, bloody. Their eyes are wild. They chant prayers through cracked lips and march from city to city, trailing infection behind them. Some blame the stars. Others blame poisoned wells. Still others whisper of a punishment from God, a reckoning for sin. Fear turns to hatred. Foreigners are chased away. Accusations fly. Some communities burn suspected poisoners alive. Crowds howl for scapegoats. But the plague keeps coming. It doesn't care who you are, rich, poor, pious, wicked. It seeps through keyholes. It curls beneath doorframes. It rides on fleas, on breath, on sorrow. You sit in your cottage, alone now. Your neighbors are gone. Your sister died yesterday, coughing foam. You buried her yourself, hands shaking. You've barricaded the door with firewood and sealed the cracks with wax. You light candles for Saint Roch and Saint Sebastian. You press a garlic clove to your chest. You don't sleep anymore. You listen. 4 footsteps. 4 coughing. 4 silence. Eventually, the sickness fades. Or rather, it passes on, moves elsewhere, leaving your village broken, half empty, silent. Churches ring hollow. Fields go unplowed. Shops stay shuttered. In some places, dogs eat from abandoned tables. In others, wildflowers overtake the paths. The survivors are dazed. Thinner, wiser, maybe, or just hollow. They stare at each other in disbelief, counting who remains. A new hierarchy is born, not of wealth or titles, but of endurance. You lived. You're still here. But everything has changed. Prices rise. Labor is scarce. Landowners beg for workers. Servants demand better pay. The old feudal structure begins to creak under the strain of loss. And still, the fleas remain. As always, you comb your hair and catch another one under your nail. You squash it, and it leaves a smear. Life continues. The plague never quite leaves Europe. It returns in waves, each time claiming more. Each time stirring old fears. But humans are stubborn. They rebuild. They plant gardens where mass graves once stood. They bake bread. They light fires. They tell stories to the children born after. Some even believe that they survived because of a charm, or a saint, or a special herb. They pass down these beliefs, whispering remedies and rituals to anyone who will listen. And the lice keep laying their eggs. And the fleas keep biting. And every scratch, every sniffle, carries with it the ghost of those terrible years. Now, as you lie in your clean bed, wrapped in warmth and silence, imagine drifting off beside someone who's just started to cough. Imagine the weight of dread. The wondering, is this just a chill from the river? Or is it the plague? You close your eyes, scratch your leg, and pray. The bells begin to ring before dawn. Low and slow, a steady clang through the misty air. You stir on your straw mattress, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and you already know it's Sunday. Time for church, whether you want to or not. Because in medieval Europe, religion isn't a personal journey. It's your map, your judge, your alarm clock, your bedtime story, and your only real hope. There's no escaping it. From the smallest village to the grandest city, the church is everywhere. It owns land. It collects taxes. It offers confession and excommunication with the same solemn face. Even the poorest peasant knows the name of their local priest and dreads his disapproving stare. You crawl out of bed and slip on your rough tunic. You splash your face with cold water from the bucket. There's no breakfast, not before Mass. Your stomach growls, but you ignore it. Everyone does. The path to church is muddy and worn, the same route taken for generations. Birds chirp faintly. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys. Ahead, you see others walking, heads down, hands clasped, some muttering prayers, others just trying not to slip. The church itself is small, but it looms large in your life. Stone walls, damp and streaked with moss. A wooden door that groans when opened. Inside, it smells like candle wax and old wool, and something faintly sour. You slide into the pew, if there are pews. Otherwise, you stand or kneel on the cold floor. The priest begins. His Latin rolls over the congregation like fog. You don't understand most of it. Almost no one does. But you listen. You bow when others bow. You cross yourself when the time comes. The sermon is long. It's about sin, of course. About the fires of hell, the wrath of God, the torments of the damned. About how even small lies, small lusts, Small laziness can drag your soul down to the eternal pit. You shift uncomfortably. Everyone does. Because hell isn't a metaphor in your world. It's a real place. With real fire. And demons. And screaming. And it's always closer than you think. Heaven sounds nice. Golden streets. Music. Peace. But the priest doesn't talk about heaven much. Fear is more useful than comfort. Outside, the wind rattles the wooden shutters. A baby cries. Someone coughs. The priest slams his hand on the pulpit and talks about judgment. The last day is coming, he says. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe today. The dead will rise from their graves, some to glory, most to torment. The earth will split open. The sky will burn. Your sins will be read aloud before the angels and the saints. And your soul will be weighed. You swallow. You think of all the little things. The loaf you stole. The cruel word you spoke. The time you skipped prayers. They echo in your mind like tolling bells. When Mass ends, you leave quietly, blinking in the morning light. The village is subdued. No one talks much on the walk home. Everyone is imagining demons. Later that week, there's a feast day. The church bells ring again, but this time with more cheer. A procession winds through the streets, led by the priest carrying a relic, a splinter from the true cross, they say, or the toe bone of a saint. People kneel as it passes, some weeping, others sneaking hopeful glances. Relics are powerful. They can heal, protect, even forgive sins, if you believe hard enough. You once saw a woman cured of her blindness after touching St. Cuthbert's sandals. Or so she said. And who are you to doubt? Faith is the air you breathe. It's the net that catches you when the world makes no sense, which is often. Life is unpredictable, brutal, short, but the church promises that suffering has meaning. That pain is a test. That humility will be rewarded, if not in this life, then in the next. You try to believe it. Confession happens once a week. You kneel in a dark booth, whispering your sins through a wooden screen. The priest listens, nods, maybe sighs. He gives you penance. 3 Hail Marys, 1 Our Father, and no butter for a week. You leave feeling lighter. For now. On feast days, there are miracle plays in the village square. Men in robes act out biblical scenes. The Garden of Eden, the crucifixion, the end of days. Children watch wide-eyed. Adults murmur approval. The devil always has the best costume. Horns, pitchfork, painted face. He always steals the show. Everywhere, there are reminders of what waits beyond this life. Paintings of hell in lurid detail. Writhing souls, leering demons, flames licking at exposed ribs. Stone carvings of angels weighing hearts against feathers. Gravestones with skulls and hourglasses, reminding you, memento mori, remember you must die. At night, you pray. You kneel by your straw bed, whispering in the dark. You ask for protection, from sickness, from hunger, from the devil in the woods. You light a candle, if you have one. You clutch a little wooden cross carved by your grandfather. You don't know if it helps, but it's all you have. Now, as you lie in your quiet, modern room, think of them. Those countless sleepers before you. Peasants curled on straw, monks in stone cells, knights in drafty towers. All dreaming of paradise. All afraid of fire. The bells have stopped. The candles are out. The judgment is not today. Sleep now. Your soul is safe, just for tonight. Beneath the thatched roof, in the cold morning hush, you sit beside an empty bowl. You've stirred it 3 times, as if something might appear. A crumb, a memory, a miracle. But it's still empty. And this is not unusual. Because in medieval Europe, famine was not rare. It came in waves, sometimes with drought, sometimes with flood, sometimes with silence. And when it came, it didn't care about your prayers, your children, or your carefully stored winter grain. Hunger was an old friend, a terrible one, but familiar. There were many reasons for it. A long winter could kill the seeds. A spring frost could ruin a whole field. Rain could flood your barley. No rain could crack your wheat. Insects arrived in clouds. Mold spread like smoke. And then, of course, there were the taxes. Because even when your crop failed, the Lord still wanted his share. The church still expected tithes. And if you had nothing, well, that was your problem. You might sell a sheep, or your daughter's shoes, or your own belt. Eventually, you'd sell the seed grain, the last bag meant for planting next year. That was when things began to spiral. The larders were bare, the ovens cold, and the bread, when you had it, might not even be safe. Because desperate times brought desperate baking. Flour was stretched with whatever you could find. Mashed bark, powdered beans, crushed acorns. You soaked old loaves, scraped the mold, reshaped them, rebaked them, prayed over them. And even then, the bread could betray you. Some years, the rye grew blackened and curled, strange and poisonous. You didn't know the name for it, ergot, a toxic fungus. But you knew what it did. People began to twitch. They spoke in tongues. Their limbs burned. They screamed of snakes in their bellies and flames under their skin. You watched your neighbor stagger through the field, laughing, crying, pulling at her hair. They said it was holy punishment, or a curse, or a demon, but it was the bread. You ate it anyway, because what else was there? And it wasn't just once. Major famines struck every decade or two, sometimes more. In the 1310s, it rained for years. Crops drowned. Fields became swamps. Entire villages starved. Parents left infants at church steps and wept as they walked away. Some didn't walk far, just out into the forest, never to return. The chroniclers wrote of men eating cats, of wives boiling shoes, of graveyards being raided. And those were just the written accounts. In your village, the stories were simpler. You remember the year the bread had maggots in it. The year your uncle boiled leather for 3 nights until it softened enough to chew. The year a boy disappeared, and no one ever spoke of it. When hunger took over, morality thinned like broth. You stole when you had to. You fought for turnips. You bartered with bones. And still, it wasn't enough. You prayed harder. You fasted. You clutched the altar rail, trembling, eyes wide, stomach hollow. But heaven was silent. When there was food, it had to last. You dried apples until they shriveled like old faces. You salted meat until it was more rock than flesh. You smoked fish until it tasted of ash and sorrow. Preservation was a desperate art. Every mousel was plugged, every jar sealed with wax. You hid food under floorboards, under ash, under lies. You learned what not to eat only by watching others get sick. Some mushrooms looked safe. Some berries were not. But when your children cried and your hands were shaking, you took the risk. Then there was the moldy grain, not just ergot, but simple rot. You tried to bake it anyway. You ground it down. You kneaded it with cold fingers, whispering apologies to God and to your stomach. You fed it to your family. You hoped the fire was hot enough. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it wasn't. Even when famine passed, the memories stayed. The gnawing fear in your gut. The way your brother's face hollowed like a cave. The silence after supper. The grave with no name. And there was no insurance. No state help. Just the hope that this year, the weather would be kinder. That the rats would go elsewhere. That the sky would rain, but not too much. Some years, you sang in the fields, full of cautious hope. Other years, you dug shallow graves and didn't sing at all. You learned to treasure crumbs, to fight over onion skins, to chew slowly, not out of manners, but to fool your body into feeling full. When strangers came to the village, beggars, monks, wanderers, you eyed them carefully. Were they hungry? Were they sick? Were they desperate? You gave them soup anyway, when you could, because when you were the stranger, someone had done the same for you. Now, centuries later, we study charts and graphs. Historians speak of the Great Famine or the harvest collapse of 1257. They count lives like tally marks. They calculate rainfall, plot it on colorful lines. But you, in that time, you counted in bowls, in days without bread, in names whispered over cold bodies. You didn't care about weather patterns. You just wanted food. Tonight, in your warm room, Think of them. Those who scraped crumbs from cracked bowls, who chewed bark and boiled roots and gnawed salted bones until their gums bled, who whispered prayers not for gold, or fame, or peace, but for one more crust. And when the famine ended, they planted again. They knelt in the dirt. They hoped, because that's all they had. Sleep now. The fields are green again. The cellar has bread. And tonight, no one will eat leather. You might think, just maybe, that if you lived in a castle, life wasn't so bad. You had servants, meat, velvet, goblets of wine, feasts in candlelit halls. But that's the fairy tale version. The real version? You were cold, uncomfortable, often sick, and deeply, constantly paranoid. Because even for nobles, medieval life kind of sucked. Let's start with the castles. Yes, they looked impressive. Towering stone walls, arrow slits, massive gates. But step inside, and you'd find drafty rooms, stone floors colder than betrayal, and fires that couldn't quite reach your toes. Thick tapestries were hung on walls, not for decoration, but to keep out the wind that hissed through every crack. Roaring hearths? Sure, but smoke poured into the room before it went up the chimney, if there was one. And even the biggest fire couldn't touch the icy corners where your bed Saturday, especially in winter. Noble clothes were warmer, yes, layers of wool, fur-trimmed cloaks, embroidered doublets. But you still wore wool hose with holes, and your underlayers stuck to your skin with sweat and old food stains. You also had lice and fleas, just like everyone else. Because fur cloaks are cozy for people and parasites. And you didn't wash more often just because you were rich. Baths required servants to haul, heat, and pour water. And in a castle, that meant climbing narrow staircases with buckets and burning wood. So instead of bathing, you perfumed. Lavender oil, rose water, sage bundles smoked under the arms. Better to smell like herbs than like yourself. Food? Oh, you ate better than peasants. Yes. Roasts, pies, gelid fish, roasted swans with their necks reattached for decoration. But most of it was overcooked, oversalted, or questionably preserved. You didn't eat fresh, you ate heavily disguised. Heavily spiced dishes weren't gourmet, they were damage control. That roast venison? Possibly aged too long. Better drown it in cinnamon and cloves. That fish pie? Let's not discuss where it came from. And the bread, even for nobles, was made from rough flour. You just got the whiter loaves, less grit, but still heavy. Also, the cutlery situation, mostly spoons, sometimes a knife, usually shared. No forks, not yet. You tore meat with fingers, slurped sauces, wiped your mouth on the back of your hand or your sleeve. Etiquette books existed, but only because so few people followed them. And while we're talking feasts, you were expected to sit through hours of them. Dozens of courses, minstrels singing endlessly, jesters telling jokes you'd heard 100 times. And while the wine flowed freely, you couldn't get too drunk. Not unless you wanted to wake up having offended the wrong cousin, or worse, said something that would reach the ears of the king. Politics never stopped, even while chewing roast goose. You had more food, more servants, more wine, but you also had more enemies. Plots, feuds, whispers. Noble life wasn't just uncomfortable. It was dangerous. Your life could unravel at a banquet, in a letter, or in a whispered rumor by a smoky hearth. One wrong move, and you were poisoned, exiled, or beheaded, or simply vanished. That's why castles had secret staircases. Why nobles carried knives to bed. Why everyone had a plan B. And when things got tense, they often did, you were expected to fight. Not command. Not delegate. Fight. Put on 60 pounds of armor. Mount a warhorse that didn't like you. Charge into a line of screaming men with spears. And that armor looked majestic. Felt miserable. In summer, it baked you alive. In rain, it rusted overnight. In battle, it dented inward with every strike, like wearing your own personal coffin. Nobles trained for years with swords, spears, lances. But injuries were inevitable. A broken rib from a fall, a crushed hand from a joust, a splintered femur from a stray hoof. And when that happened, good luck. You got leeches, or bone setting with no anesthesia, or a poultice of moldy bread and pig fat. Sometimes it worked. Often, it didn't. You could die at 30, not from plague or war, but from a stubbed toe gone septic. And despite the wealth, many nobles lived on the edge of ruin. War was expensive. Retainers demanded pay. Horses needed feed. Armor had to be replaced. Taxes came due. A few bad harvests, a failed marriage alliance, or a rebellious baron, and you might lose your lands. Your castle. Your life. Even childbirth wasn't safe. Noble women were expected to produce heirs, and quickly. But giving birth in medieval Europe, even in a manor house, was like walking through fire blindfolded. Midwives, herbal remedies, prayers. No doctors. No sterilization. No cesarean options. Many women died, and many who survived never truly healed. So yes, you had a canopy bed, but you shared it with fever dreams, drafts, and the weight of expectation. Every morning brought fresh threats. Assassination, war, scandal, bad weather. You looked like royalty. You felt like a cornered fox. At night, the torches flickered. The guards shuffled in the cold. You lay beneath layers of wool and fur, listening for footsteps. Because sometimes, the enemy wasn't outside the gate. It was in the next room, or sharing your pillow. Sleep now. No servants whisper tonight. No plots in the dark. Just your breath, and the quiet ticking of a world that finally stopped chasing you. The fire is low now. Just soft embers pulsing like the last heartbeat of the day. You've trudged through mud, crouched in smoke-filled kitchens, and shared a straw mattress with fleas, a snoring grandfather, and perhaps a pig named Marjorie. You've scrubbed with vinegar, dodged chamber pots, and eaten turnip soup 5 nights in a row. And you survived. Somehow. Because that's what medieval people did. They endured. They whispered prayers under their breath, not always expecting answers, but clinging to the rhythm of belief like a rope in a storm. They laughed, even when the roof leaked and the bread was moldy. They told stories by firelight of saints and beasts and enchanted woods, not because they believed them all, but because stories were warmer than silence. They stitched torn tunics. They sang work songs. They held hands in the face of illness and buried their dead with trembling reverence. They raised children who would grow up to scrape the same frost from the windows, sweep the same ash from the hearth, and whisper the same complaints about aching backs. Even in the worst winters, someone always managed to sneak a joke into the stew. A neighbor traded a bent spoon for a smile. A grandmother taught a child how to catch rain in a bucket just right. And when the lice came back, and they always came back, you learned to comb carefully and laugh through the itch. Yes, life was hard. The beds were lumpy. The food was bland. The air smelled like old sheep and damp feet. But there was life. And where there was life, there was rhythm. Seasons passed like chapters in a slow book. Winter to spring, mud to flowers, hunger to harvest, and back again. Each sunrise was a tiny miracle, even when it rose behind clouds. You could watch it through a slit in the thatch, steaming your breath onto the frozen air and pretending, just for a moment, that you lived in a painting. Nights were full of sounds. Crickets, creaking beams, the low shuffle of someone getting up to pee into the family chamber pot. Sometimes distant howls. Sometimes the thud of hooves on the road. Sometimes just silence. And in that silence, you dreamed of a future without fleas, of hot bread and warm boots, of a world where the rain didn't come through the roof and the Lord didn't raise taxes again. Dreams were free, and they cost nothing to share. Even when the parchment was scarce and the ink was made of soot and spit, stories still found a way to be told. A traveling bard, a muttered folk song, a chalk drawing on a tavern wall. You lived your life among filth, yes, but also among meaning, among people, among memories that whispered louder than the rats. And now, as your eyes drift closed, in this century, in this clean bed, in this quiet space, Let yourself imagine for one more moment what it meant to close your eyes on a medieval night. The straw mattress rustles beneath you. The fire crackles once, like it's sighing goodnight. Your feet are cold, but your sister's back is warm against yours. Outside, the wind tugs at the shutters, but they hold fast. The stars twinkle over the thatched roof, ignoring your worries. And in that moment, just that moment, it is enough. You are fed. You are loved. You are alive. And tomorrow, you will chase the geese from the garden and sweep the ash from the hearth and maybe get a bite of cheese if the market's good. But tonight, you rest. You let go. You join the long, muddy, beautiful line of people who lived before you, poorly, imperfectly, stubbornly, and dared to keep going. You are not so different from them. You complain about the cold. You worry about rent. You dream of more. But here, under blankets instead of cloaks, in a room without smoke or fleas, you can let their story close. Turn the final page. Exhale. Sleep now. The mud has dried. The stew has cooled. The fleas are gone. And in the quiet between centuries, all that remains is the simple hum of humanity. Tired, itchy, and still dreaming.